Okay, as I was saying, I want to give special thanks to the Institute for inviting me here today to speak about the issues facing our Arctic homeland, and more specifically about the importance of polar bears to our people, the Inuit of Arctic Canada. For those of you who are not familiar with the Inuit language terminologies, the word nunuk is a term we use for polar bear. As president of Inuit Tapari Kanatami, the national organization representing Inuit in Canada, and as an Inuk who was born and raised in the Arctic, I bring you warm greetings from the people of Arctic Canada and from the 4 Inuit regions that include the Inuvialuit of the Western Arctic, Nunavut, Nunavik, and Nunatsiavut. If you look at this map, the range is from the Yukon border here to the Newfoundland, Labrador on the eastern shore. I grew up in this community up here in Resolute. In Resolute, population 130, in the winter, November, December, January, 24 hours of darkness, pitch darkness. I've never seen the sun in December when I was growing up. When I first saw it, it blew me away. Like, how can people live like this? And in the summer, June, July, August, it's the opposite, where the sun is above the horizon for 24 hours. It doesn't go down, so you wake up at 8, 7 in the morning, but you ask, is that, when you wake up, is that AM or PM? So you can never tell. And growing up in that community, I grew up with polar bears. There's a lot of polar bears in the high Arctic. You've seen the scientific data and the information that was presented to you today. And it's important to know and understand that I've lived with the polar bears. And you hear about the climate change. I agree with climate change. We live and breathe what's happening in the Arctic. Now, the issue about the polar bear population and how that's being affected. As it stands right now, the scientific community does not know or understand what it will do to the polar bear population. But the Inuit have a pretty good understanding, in my opinion. As I said, we live and breathe the climate change issue. We rely on the polar bear. It's good eating. It tastes like lamb and pork. But that's the thing, is that in the Arctic, that's what we rely on. The seal, the polar bear, the walrus, the beluga, the narwhal. If you consider in Europe, in North America, in the southern states where there are trees, there's this new fad or new movement. It's called the 100-kilometer diet. So you buy locally, you buy from your local farmer, you try and avoid exported products. We've been doing that for thousands of years. We rely on our local food, our local harvesting. And now we have to deal with the world population. And it's quite interesting because we need to voice what we know and to try and include the scientific community. It's not the other way around. The scientific community is slowly learning that. And Marcus, he was very instrumental in working with Inuit. It's required, when you look at the 4 regions, the Inuvialuit, Nunavut, Northern Quebec, Nunavik, and Nunatsiavut, they've settled all their land claims. And within those land claims, it's required that government and Inuit work together to ensure that the resources, renewable and non-renewable, are being managed alongside with Inuit. And this is where Marcus was giving his presentation on the new role of the Nunavut government in this region here, where I grew up. That land claim requires that Inuit and government work together to ensure that the resources are being managed, that the polar bear is being managed, that the seals are being managed, that the caribou is being managed, the narwhal, the walrus. But we need to take into consideration what the world is doing to our homeland. 20 years ago, we started bringing to attention to the rest of the world the issue of airborne pollutants, the ozone layer. And I always say this when the world population comes up to the north, or scientists come up and start actually confirming what we're experiencing in our lives. We told you so. And that's the thing, is that we need to be listened to and be taken seriously and be given more weight, because this is where we grew up. This is where I grew up. The knowledge that's included in this region, in our circumpolar world, we live in it. I don't want to impose on how you guys live your lives here in Paris or in Europe, because I don't have a clue. Someday maybe my people will become scientists and study your area and actually maybe dictate to you how you should manage your affairs. But this is what I'm saying, is that where a population, as Marcus was saying, of only about 55,000 people, but we cover an area that's the size of the European Union. We have a lot of elbow room, but at the same time we have a lot of wildlife and a lot of habitat that we need to manage, because we rely on that. We rely on that harvest. We rely on that bounty. And it's about time that the rest of the world is actually starting to look north. But what I say to you is that, to you, the world, is that you need to include us, because we are local experts. We know and understand the land, the environment, and the wildlife. When you consider the area that's involved and the people that are living in that area, this is the one thing that, because there's so many Inuit in this world, so few of us, that we don't have the voice as much as we'd like. So again, I thank the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade in having invited us, and at the same time, the governments that have organized this, and to the organizations that have put this together. But again, it's important that the rest of the world realizes that this is something that is dear to us. One of our issues with the rest of the world is that we don't need your sympathy, we need your brains. If you are going to make decisions on the Arctic, use your brains, not your heart. Yes, you see polar bears floating on an ice pan, but that polar bear, the Latin name, Ursus maritimus, it's a marine mammal. It swims very well, it floats, it sleeps in water, it hunts in water, it hunts man. And this is the thing, we respect that animal. It's our bounty as well. It's in our best interest to ensure that the management of the population of the polar bear is healthy. Marcus showed you what the government of Nunavut has been doing in the past 3 years. There was question on the International Union on the Convention of IUCN on the differing numbers. But we're working towards making those numbers accurate and realistic as to now. We don't want to rely on numbers that were done 10 years ago, because it's in our best interest to ensure that the population of the bear is healthy, because we rely on it. It's our bounty. And the methods that are being used and the management system that's been put in place since the early 70s. You saw a graph earlier about how the polar bear population from 1972 was going up, was actually rising. That was based on the fact that Inuit and government started working together to manage those populations. Before, in the 50s and 60s, from the 1800s, the whalers, the sealers from the European nations came in, almost decimated the populations. The buffalo in America was an example. But we took control, we took management, started managing these resources based on Inuit Hayama Inuit knowledge, traditional knowledge, and scientific information, married the two, and made it so that it's a model for the rest of the world to use. And this is what we need to do with the rest of the nations, is to have people understand. When the gentleman was talking about the historical data of how Inuit respected the animal, they still do today. Now, how do we translate that into scientific terms that can be used to manage the population? And this is where the regions within Inuit Nunangat, within Arctic Canada, with their settled land claims, have labeled and dictated how Inuit and government will work together to ensure that the populations are healthy. My people rely on that polar bear. It's interesting to hear from the United States again, where they've submitted a proposal again to uplist the polar bear, to ban the trade. They tried that in 2010. They failed because it was not based on scientific data. And here we are again today. Next spring, we're going to have to make the same arguments with the same numbers, if not more updated numbers, because we've actually proven that there are healthy populations out there. And I still can't understand it. It becomes political. And this is the thing, is that when we went into Washington to try and understand their thinking on this, the answer back was, we agree with the scientific data, but there are people that are using climate change and some people that are arguing against climate change. So when they use the polar bear, they said they use it as a blunt tool because it's an iconic image. Everyone sees the polar bear, they think the Arctic. Then all of a sudden they think climate change. So that's what America said to us. But here we as a people are now faced with the ban on the trade of the polar bear. Marcus explained to you within Canada there's a management system where they set quotas based on actual populations, based on scientific and traditional knowledge. If they see that the population is going up, the quota may go up. But he showed you as well within that same graph that the quota is never met. So say in Resolute, where I grew up, over here, 130 people, quota of maybe 20 polar bears to harvest. Of that 20, the Inuit in Resolute may decide maybe 3, maybe 4 will go to sport hunters, meaning people from outside that would pay to hunt a polar bear. But that 20, that number 20 does not change. If the community wanted to, they could do all 20 for sport hunters, but that's not in the Inuits' best interest. Because it's our food, it's a way of life. When my son hunts a polar bear, that's a milestone. It's one step towards becoming a man, or someone that is more responsible within the community. And it's also food on the table. And that's what the world tends to forget sometimes, is that, yes, there are concerns about the polar bear habitat based on climate change, but when you talk about the multi-year ice and the seasonal ice, Inuit live in the area. This part here is called the Northwest Passage. It goes up this way. This area is being opened up, meaning it's becoming ice-free during the summer. In the winter, because the Earth is on a 17-degree tilt, and because we have 3 months of darkness, and we're that much further away from the sun, there always will be annual ice. So, traditional knowledge, Inuit knowledge, says annual ice is more bioproductive as opposed to multi-year ice, which is not as bioproductive. And this is where scientists and Inuit need to work together and determine and come to an understanding and say, yes, that's true. But there's more need for data, more need for research and study. But that's the thing, is that you cannot exclude Inuit from working together with government to determine what's going to happen in their homeland. And this is what I'm saying. An example is in the Inuvialuit, in the Beaufort Sea area. You saw from our theory, the video on the changing of the sea ice, multi-year to seasonal. There was a ship, an icebreaker, that went up into the Beaufort Sea area to do study, and they figured we were not going to see any polar bears and we're not going to see any seals because it's a multi-year ice area, so there's no open water. And the people in the Inuvik region suggested otherwise. No, there's polar bears up there, there's seals up there. So they were going through the ice, breaking up the ice with the icebreaker. And when they'd open up that passageway, they'd see seals popping up, and there were polar bears everywhere. But the scientists had made determinations and projections. Again, it's crystal ball when they peer into the future. They figured that climate change would affect the polar bear population this way, but they're actually seeing it going that way. It's actually on the rise. So what does that mean? And this is what Inuit and scientists need to determine, to work together. The previous presenter was talking about the Arctic Council, the range states, determining what's going to happen in the Arctic for the next millennia. We insisted that Inuit be included in that process, so we are a permanent observer status. We don't have veto. We may someday, where we're still working on it. But this is the thing, is that if you look at the website that's a part of the program who I work for, it'll give you links to all the areas of my interest, which is the Arctic. The Inuit Circumpolar Council passed a declaration on the Arctic sovereignty, as well as the declaration on resource development, renewable and non-renewable. And it's all based on Inuit traditional knowledge. And this is what I say to you, to the world, to the EU. Let us manage our affairs. We've been doing it for thousands of years, and I think we've been doing it very well. And we invite you, the scientists, to work with us to make it so that it's a better world for everyone else. And to heed what we say, and to understand that What we know and what we breathe and live in the Arctic is the truth. Like I said, we need your brains, not your heart. And when animal rights activists use the polar bear as an iconic image, I don't know if you understand this term, it's a cash cow for them. I have too much respect for the bear to do that. It's not a cash cow for the Inuit. It's a way of life. It's our diet. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you everyone for listening.